Friends, hello, this is Carter, and welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the conversation series between writers where I just get to have fun conversations. And today was a great conversation. We'll get to my guest in just a moment. First things first, another mention that my company, Unbound Writer, offers one-on-one book coaching, and we can do anything from developmental editing to just being an accountability partner for you. We also have self-guided online classes, and we do have scheduled retreats and seminars, all taught by myself. And if you are interested in any of those things, particularly the one-on-one coaching, you can go to unboundwriter.com, and there's a link there where you can schedule a free 20-minute consult with me to see if we might be a good fit to work together and just to talk through some of the issues that you might be having with your writing. So check that out. All right, let's get to today's guest. I had a fun conversation today. Today I talked to Matt Goldman. Matt is the author of 8 novels. I believe they're all kind of mystery, thriller, suspense, but he's a New York Times bestselling author, and he's also an Emmy Award winning writer. He started his career after studying chemistry on kind of the track to go to med school. He decided he wanted to try stand-up comedy, which he did a couple times, but really realized he wanted to be more of a comedy writer. And he worked on shows like Seinfeld, Ellen, The New Adventures of Old Christine, and Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency, before kind of branching off onto his own and writing novels. So he has a lot of good stories, particularly about Seinfeld. We talked about Seinfeld a lot. You know, I'm a huge fan of stand-up, so we went into the parallels between writing stand-up comedy and writing novels, especially thrillers, and the beats especially, and the economy of words that need to be employed. And so for me, it was fascinating to talk to him about his work writing sitcoms and getting those notes and working with Jerry Seinfeld, and then kind of moving on to writing novels. And you know, there's a lot of similarities there in terms of, especially how much do you embed humor into suspenseful novels, and how innate does that humor have to be to the author's own voice. So there's a lot of good stuff in here. We had a fun little storytelling at the end. Yeah, it was great. You're going to love this one. This is my conversation with Matt Goldman. Well, congratulations on the recent release, The Murder Show, by the way. That's exciting.
Thank you.
How's that going?
Thanks. You too have a new book.
Yep. Mine was January.
Yeah, it's going well. You know, it's been a couple of busy weeks.
Yeah.
But it's starting to wind down. I know I'll see you in Gaithersburg. That's one of the last things I'm doing.
Yeah. We're on. It's just you and me on a panel together. So that'll be nice, which is nice because, you know, you go to a lot of these conferences and they try to get 5 or 6 people on a panel, and you talk for about 2 minutes collectively. And not that I need to fill up the time, but it's nice to have a little bit more dedicated time. Do you like doing events and traveling associated with your books?
I like them once I get there.
Yeah.
When I just had about 10 days in a row, and then it starts to wear on me a little bit.
Yeah.
But it is nice to connect with readers. So,
it's great. And, you know, just coming from the corporate world, which I'm not a part of anymore, but, you know, it's such a different feeling. Like you go on location or you go do a site visit or whatever you're doing, and there's pressure. You know, the book stuff, you know, the travel is still exhausting, but you don't have to prepare anything. You just like talk about your stuff, which is great.
Yeah.
So
it is.
It's very real. Same with this kind of thing, podcasts and whatnot. Now you're in the Midwest. You're Minneapolis, right?
Minneapolis. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a very robust thriller community. I've got.
I just
talked to Josh Mullen last week. Yeah.
Oh, he's wonderful.
Yeah.
Where are you?
I'm in Colorado. I'm just outside of Boulder.
Nice.
Yeah. So when you started writing, did you establish kind of, a community there in Minneapolis? Have you been in Minneapolis for a long time?
Well, I grew up here, and then uh, when I was a junior in college, I started doing stand-up comedy,
Hmm.
and that led me to a comedy writing career. So I was in Los Angeles for a long time.
Okay, yeah, and
Uh,
I've seen your credits, and obviously you've written
yeah,
with some big shows, but that's it's interesting because I'm a massive fan of stand up. Actually, it's weird. I got an email today that Louis C.K. has just written a work of literary fiction that's coming out
really.
in a few months. Yeah. So I'm very curious to see that. And I
Yeah,
think there are a lot of parallels between comedy writing and novel writing, particularly thriller writing, in terms of beats,
yeah,
um, and voice, and just the right word and the right placement makes all the, which is totally
yes,
stand up, right?
yes, yeah. And it's a economy of words for both mediums.
100%.
And yeah, the right word, the right comma makes all the difference.
Yeah, it's amazing when you see comedy, especially storytelling comedy, deconstructed. It's fascinating, and I think it's a huge lesson for writers. But you, so you got into that. Like, what was the, aside from the obvious love of comedy, what was,
Right.
what was the idea of like, this is really what I want to do, knowing, comedy might be the only thing with worse odds of being successful in than writing.
Fortunately, I was like I was a young boy. I was a young guy, so I didn't think things through very well back then.
Yeah,
Which,
yeah.
which, if I had, I probably wouldn't have done it.
Right,
Uh,
right,
so because I didn't know the odds, I just thought, oh, this is something I want to do, so I'm going to do it.
right.
And but I don't, I can't even explain why I did stand up. I saw it live for the first time. I was a chemistry major in college. I thought, oh, I
You
think
just
I'm
went
going
to
to
an
do
open
that.
mic kind of a thing?
Some friends invited me to see stand up. Yeah, at a pub, and I really fell in love with the writing part of it. And I
Yeah,
didn't get any joy out of the performing part. I
yeah.
didn't, even
Interesting.
when it went great, I didn't, once I knew the joke worked, then I wanted to move on. I didn't
Yeah,
want to do it again over and
right,
over again.
right, right, right.
So, and then I went out to LA and it worked out. But again, I just love the writing, and I'm quite introverted. I say I'm an introvert with social skills.
Yeah,
So working in a room full of people for 60, 70, 80 hours a week was just exhausting for me.
yeah. Oh, I'm
And
sure.
the other people were great. They were funny and smart, and I learned a ton from them. But uh, I had always wanted to move into books. It just took a while for me to do it.
It's fascinating. And when you're just kind of going back to stand up a little bit, there is another parallel with stand up comedians and writers in the sense that, the true lifers at it, it's a 20-year arc, to get
Oh
to
yeah.
that place easily. Like if you look at all the stories of all the stand ups, it's probably, but sometime around the 25th year, we're seeing it right now with Bill Burr, for example, who's been big
Yeah.
for a while, but now he's exploding,
Yes.
and he's been on the scene for decades. And this is just such a common story, and it's just fascinating. I feel like writers are the same. I mean, I've been writing for 20 years, and my 10th book was the one that just kind of finally kind of broke out, so it's fascinating.
That's great. Like this is my eighth book, and I feel like I've just scratched the surface. Like I have so much more to do.
Yeah, I mean, you've
Yeah.
hit the New York Times list, which is phenomenal. I don't know
Yeah.
what book was that.
It was my first book.
That's
And I
fucking,
did it
that's crazy.
and I did it with the audiobook. So, which
Oh,
I guess counts because I asked my publisher, my agent, does that count if you do it with the audiobook? And they said, yeah, it counts.
that's great.
So, and then the murder show just hit the USA
That's
list.
great. Yeah,
So
and that's such a good feeling because it's hard.
it
It's hard
is.
to.
And once you hit it, they can't really take it away from you.
No,
So
no.
it's
I
nice.
hit USA Today with my third book, and I
Yeah.
haven't hit it again. Even though I've
Yeah.
had better sales on this book, but USA Today, it's everything. It's includes self-published, and so to hit
Yeah.
USA Today is fantastic. That's a lot of.
Yeah. I don't know how it works for either of those lists. I think there's like a giant drum with a bunch of ping pong balls with our names on them, and
There
they just
is,
pull it
there
out
is,
everywhere.
there is something like that for sure.
Yeah.
But you, so just backing up a little bit, I think you said you were studying chemistry,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. I
then
thought
that
I was going to
obviously
medical
didn't.
school.
Oh
That was a
wow!
big U-turn for me.
So
Yeah.
what was the impetus of that U-turn, and when did that happen?
You know what? I think I had always wanted to write and get into something like that. I played in a band in high school, and on one hand, who didn't? But I played with like really good people, and we played at real clubs
Hmm.
when I was 15 years old, and that certainly ignited something in me to do something more in the arts or
Yeah.
crafts.
Performative. Yeah.
Um, and no one ever told me I couldn't do it. No one said, "Oh, you have to be." I just didn't know anybody who did do it. I just
Right.
grew up in a world where I didn't know any writers, I didn't know any
Right.
actors. I did meet some musicians, and some of the people in my band have gone on to have very nice careers. Um, but but I just thought, oh, I guess you have to get a regular job, which is what most people think. And then something just clicked in me, and there's always, and to this day, I'm 62 years old. I still think, well, I could always go back to medical school, or I could fall
Right.
back on something.
Right.
But even though I've been doing this
If
forever,
this doesn't work out.
yeah,
I mean, but it's that the idea of that clicking in you, that's something I'm always been fascinated in talking to hundreds of authors in this format. Like that click resonates differently with people. And to your point, you said, you have to get a real job because that's just what people do. That's the resonating sound in one's mind at that age, right? So
yes,
that click, I mean, the idea of how that escape velocity is strong enough for you to actually
uh,
move beyond that fear is fascinating to me because in my case, I just worked at a corporate job and wrote at the same time.
yes,
It worked out great for me. There's other people who are like, I'm giving myself 2 years. I'm going to burn through all my savings. And if it doesn't work
right.
out, I'll figure out what to do. So where were you on that spectrum?
Well, I mean, my day job was a television writer. I started doing stand up when I was 21. I started getting hired as a television writer when I was 24. I went to work on Seinfeld when I was 26.
Wow.
So I did do my day job for 3 books. My first
Okay.
3 books, I did not give up television writing.
Right.
Um, and I wrote those while I was still working in TV. And then I made the break.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
After I had written the 3rd book, but it wasn't out yet.
When you think about, and I'm sure I'm highly ignorant about this, but the idea of the writer's room on these shows, or if you think of, being a writer at like SNL, for example, which I've
Yeah,
always been like super fascinated with, you kind of described it earlier, the intensity of the long hours and the collaborative environment, but it's also a collaborative environment where you're not
correct.
responsible for the full weight of the episode.
Right,
Um, and then you move over to novel writing, which is, man, that is you. was that
right.
was that something that you were like, oh, thank God I'm finally responsible? Or
Yeah,
was it weird?
it, no, it felt like a natural fit for me, novel writing. The the challenge for me in Hollywood, and I witnessed other people have it all the time too, was getting your voice through unencumbered and unpicked apart at and dinged. And because as soon as you pull a couple of threads on voice and vision, everything falls apart. And I had a front row seat to it with Seinfeld because I was there in the very beginning.
Hmm.
And some people don't remember, a lot of people don't know.
That show almost didn't get picked up.
NBC did not like it.
Yeah.
And Larry David was too volatile to go to the meetings. That's what NBC thought. He wasn't even allowed to go to the network meetings. So they sent me, like a basically a child, in just to have another body in the room on our side. And I didn't say a word in those meetings, but I watched Jerry very calmly and confidently say, "We're going to do our voice. If you don't like it, cancel the show." And we had a lot of conversations about that. And I think Jerry said something to the effect of, listen, if I'm going out to sea, I'm doing it in a ship I built, not in the piece of crap they want me to build.
Right.
So, um, and fortunately, NBC hung in long enough for that show to catch fire.
Yeah,
Um,
that's fat. I mean, and you obviously hear a lot of stories about Seinfeld and that kind of hubris, which you attach naturally to somebody with a lot of money, but back in the early days, there he didn't have that money, and he still had.
Right.
Um, who was it? It was Judd Apatow has his book of interviews with comedians, and there's
Yeah.
one with Seinfeld on there, which is very philosophical, but it is very much like this is my vision, and I live for my vision, so I will die by my vision and not for
Yeah.
somebody else's.
Yeah. And I think that's the attitude you have to have, whether you're writing television or books. You have to be true to your thing,
Right.
and you'll find your audience by doing so.
But there's also the flip side of that, I think, is you have to be humble enough to learn. And because we all start out and we have a lot to learn. And I'm speaking for
Yes, so
myself, my
much.
first three
Yeah.
books didn't sell. And so I have to be able to say, okay, why am I not good enough? Or what is it? And being able to
Hmm.
parse the differences between this isn't right for us and this isn't good. uh,
Right.
and you have to get better. Because how many writers do we see that are just so adherent to their vision, but it's not good? In a conventional
No, I
sense.
know. And television taught me a lot of things, and one of them is um, that first of all, it can always be better,
Right,
whatever you're working on, and that some stuff doesn't work, and you have to let it go.
right,
You,
right,
you,
right,
even when you really believe in it, when the actors read it around the table and it stinks, or they rehearse it for the first time on their feet and it's bad, you got to change it.
right.
Something's broken in there.
And the art, I think, is in the artist knowing who to listen to, because again, going back to the example of a writer's room and you're getting notes from
Yeah,
a network, that is whatever the cliche of that is, like, these people aren't writers, they don't know what they're doing, it's easy to ignore that, as
right.
opposed to, as a novelist, your agent or your editor gives you notes, they're a trusted source,
They
and
very much are.
that's
Yeah.
when you listen, right? That's where you're like, oh, I
Yes.
didn't see that. And it resonates with you. You have to feel that note.
Yeah. The big difference in the book world, at least for me, is my agent and my editor. I always say they're in the boat rowing with me.
Yeah.
They are helping me get to where I want to go. That was rarely the case in Hollywood.
Wow.
It was the notes would come out of left field. They didn't make any sense. Um, they were often thought of that morning based on what did well in the ratings the night before. It had nothing to do with what the writers and I were trying to accomplish.
Right.
So that was always a battle, it felt like. And I had this conversation with Dennis Lehane at the Minneapolis BoucherCon because he's was telling me how much he liked writing TV now.
Huh.
And
Yeah,
I
of
said, I
course.
think that's because you got to really establish your voice in the book world
Right.
so well. And then you can take that into TV and people aren't going to tell you you don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
But for
And
those of us who started in TV, there's a lot of like, we're that young guy, we're going to tell him what to do.
right.
So,
And just the evolution of TV itself, where now
yeah,
there's now networks and streaming services that, for a rounding error can launch a TV show that is risky. You think about shows like, three examples that immediately come to mind are Seinfeld, The Office, and The Simpsons, all of which really struggled the first couple of years,
yeah,
because they were different, because they were innovative, and they weren't that
yes,
just watered down, beat by beat kind of comedic drivel that
right.
we just became accustomed to. And in the 90s, that's Seinfeld really stood out as like, what
It
is
did.
this?
Yeah, it did, but it did a lot of basic things well that people forget about. Um, we all remember that every character having their own stories and they dovetail in this really fun way at the end. But in the beginning, those four characters were usually in the same situation, the same story, and you would get to know them. Like it's
Hmm.
really important for the audience or the reader to get to know the characters. They don't have to like them. That likability is overblown, but they have to enjoy reading about or watching their behavior.
They have to, yeah, and I think that's the same with the novel's protagonist. And because I get that a lot with very morally gray protagonists, which I just think is
Yes.
realistically and
Yes.
realistic and more interesting. But so you don't have to like them, but you have to care what happens to them, even if you want them to fail or whatever. They have to be
Yeah.
interesting in their
Right.
own way. Now, so this is always interesting to me as well, especially with your book world and generation, is clearly not here are eight, novels that are humor based. And so, for example, my newsletters are all humor because I love
Right.
humor. I love writing
Right.
humor. I write really dark, fucked up psychological thrillers that
Right.
maybe have peppered elements of humor, but only if it's that person's voice and it's not
Yeah.
distracting and it's not showing off or anything like that. Was that a natural, you can lean both ways, obviously.
Yeah, I find things that don't have any humor in them unrealistic.
Mhm.
Because that's humor is just a natural reaction
Right.
that most of us have to stressful situations.
Right.
And
Gallows kind of humor in a way.
yeah, so I don't write jokey things. I think
Right.
there's certain characters who, when they get together, they do kind of talk in a way where they try to have a few laughs. But and that feels very natural to me. And in the television world, Breaking Bad, The Sopranos,
100,
The
yeah,
Wire are
100%.
the funniest shows
Yeah.
of their. So that feels very natural to me. I really like being a wise ass for no reason.
Right. Right.
Uh,
Because that's the
is
character's
isn't
personality.
yeah, but also but I mean I really learned a lot from Chandler's Philip Marlowe because he was a very funny narrator,
Right.
but he didn't mouth off unless someone really deserved it. He wasn't just
No,
a trying to be funny for his own ego.
he was more wry. Yeah. And
Yes, very much.
you think of something like I talk on the show about Breaking Bad all the time in terms of
Yeah,
writing and elements. And the perfect example of that is the Jesse Pinkman character,
yeah,
who is hysterical, but he's not a sidekick. He has real gravity, real weight, real
yes,
emotion, and his humor is so natural. There's nothing worse than I'm reading a thriller and the protagonist is quote unquote funny, but you can totally tell it's trying too hard because I don't think it's the
yeah,
author's natural voice. So he's making
right.
these references that feel very movie like. And it just doesn't. So, I mean, is that your advice is to really, know yourself as a writer? If you're going to be funny, it has to feel natural.
Yeah, I think know your strengths as a writer is good advice for all of us.
Yeah.
And humor certainly is one facet in
Right.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. Because you don't want somebody who's in a harrowing situation, who's at essence a human being, constantly joking about it. Like they don't have a care in the world. Like
Right.
they
That's a
might be in
real
fear of their life.
yes. Yeah, when the stakes are ignored, um uh it's it so that someone can try to be entertaining. It just I think the reader just falls out. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
who would do that?
Right. Right.
Um
Right. Right.
so it
That's a
then
great
when
way of
it
putting
doesn't
it.
feel real, uh and you stop caring about that character because they just said something really stupid in the context of the stakes of the scene,
Yeah.
then you don't even care as much if they get killed or if they save the world, whatever their thing is.
Right.
And that's a problem when the reader stops caring.
That's a great way of putting it when they ignore the stakes because and I think that happens a lot. And what's I think the challenge, and I'd be curious to know your opinion on this, whether you think this is just kind of an innate observational ability or if it's something you can learn and improve upon over time. But you think about the stakes of the situation and you want their reaction and their emotion to it to be believable, but yet you're also going to have moments of your book that do definitely stretch the limits of the
Yeah,
imagination in order to
absolutely.
set up the structure.
Yeah.
Good. So say something like Under the Dome by Stephen King, where it's a preposterous, just kind of premise of this invisible dome, but then how the characters react is very human. Um,
Yes.
and finding that balance of like this you're really, but you've made it so believable emotionally. I'm willing to accept the ridiculous plot premise.
Yeah. I mean, every book that has time travel in it is that.
Right.
Um,
Right.
which another one of the like, and for most of those, I have a hard time because, well, if you could travel in time to solve this problem, why couldn't you solve that other problem?
Right. Right.
But Stephen King's
11
11
22 63.
handled that really well.
One of his best books, if not his best
Yeah,
book, I think.
yeah, I agree. And interesting that he started to write that a long time before he figured out how to do it. Like he had to put it away for a long time before
Yeah.
he could figure out how to write it.
Yeah.
But I do think a lot of that is teachable. Um, uh, what's hard to teach, I think, for a writer is how to see light, how to incorporate the sounds and smells of a scene into your writing. Character dialogue. I mean, dialogue somewhat teachable, but people really have to try to listen
Yeah.
to how people talk.
Right.
Um,
But not listen
so
so closely that you're transcribing because most
no,
dialogue
because it would
is
boring.
gobbledygook.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, but people don't talk in sentences a lot of times. They stop short. They
Right.
the way they where they put pauses, the way they ask questions and answer them themselves. Uh that's just listening.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, I think, and I do a lot of coaching as well. And I think what I'm seeing mostly with aspiring authors, particularly in the thriller, mystery, suspense kind of umbrella, is just too many words. There's
Yeah.
like, you've just spent 5,000 words and what has actually happened? Not much has happened. This can be
Yeah.
literally 500 words, and all of a sudden you have this propulsiveness where I want to know more. And I think that editing down to these staccato-y kind of bursts, and you can still have all that descriptions, all the smells and sights and sounds. It
Yeah.
could be 3 words, that you're
Oh,
like
I
that
agree. I'm a
evokes
big
something.
believer in that,
Yeah.
that you use that stuff sparingly and you
Yeah.
use it in tense moments if you can,
Right.
because then if character A asks a very uh, important question of character B, that you put those little few sentences between the question and the answer, so the reader's with you the whole time.
Right. And you're
They
giving
want
them
to
a
hear what character.
pause.
Yes. So I agree with that. And I think it's another thing from stand up and TV comedy writing is I learned brevity. It was
Right.
really an important thing to learn. And I would say in my second drafts, they end up being longer than my first. I probably cut 5% and add 10%
Mm-hmm.
because I go a little too far with the brevity sometimes.
Right.
And
Right. But isn't it a beautiful challenge in the editing to read a paragraph of yours and you just know innately it just feels a little bit overwritten, and you're like,
yes.
how can I take my one of my favorite things is like, all right, how can I take, a verb and turn it into an adjective that completely describes everything in one word,
Hmm.
and that just comes with writing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of words and getting
Yes.
feedback and
Yeah.
rewriting and just getting, it's almost rhythmic when you're writing. Like you can almost, this section,
Y-
I feel the percussiveness is a
Very
little bit
much.
faster.
Yeah, I agree.
How many drafts do you typically do?
I do, um, I probably do 2 or 3 drafts before I show it to my wife, who's a big reader.
Yeah.
And then I do another draft after she reads it and I send it to my agent
Yeah.
and I'll do another draft. I don't usually by the time I have a first draft done, there's not going to be big changes.
Yeah.
Um, Moments will change. Sometimes I'll cut as much as a whole chapter or
Yeah.
add another chapter. But overall, the story's fairly there by the time I have the first draft done.
And then do you know when it goes to, are you in the mindset, and you probably are since your history and TV background, what we've discussed, knowing that, okay, it's done, but it's not at all done. Now it goes to the agent and the editor, and there might be major changes. Like there
Yeah.
might be subplots that are being asked of me.
Um, it hasn't happened in the book world. There's been some changes. Um, my editor and I have kind of had a love fest because, some writers are very precious about their work, especially first time novelists and things. And I am quite willing to let things go and make changes.
Yeah, me too.
Um, so and like I said, the notes I get from her are so much more supportive and helpful
Right,
than the notes I generally got in Hollywood that I want to do, and I do most of them
right,
because I agree with them. She has fresh eyes on it, but she knows what I'm trying to accomplish.
right.
So I and you're a Colorado guy, so you'll appreciate this analogy. I think a first draft is like shoveling a driveway in a blizzard. When you're when
It's
you're
still coming down.
done, when you're done, you can kind of tell where the driveway is,
Right.
but you still have a lot more work to do.
Right,
So,
right. That's a
the,
100%. And I think you nailed it on the head. Like you make those changes because they resonate with you, not because you're appeasing somebody. You're like,
exactly.
and also knowing your editor has their pulse, they're taking the pulse of the market much more clearly than you are, because you're maybe writing your first draft, not necessarily thinking so much about the
Right.
market. You're thinking about just your story and
Yeah.
probably entertaining yourself.
Yeah. And
Um,
it's certainly that the market and my editor's place in the market have certainly influenced what I write. I
yeah,
mean, my first four books were a series. I would have kept writing that series, but my editor said, let's try a standalone. And
yeah.
that's because standalones were doing well. And so then I wrote four standalones.
So then with the
So
standalone, do you typically give them an idea or a synopsis so they can have some
not a
input?
synopsis, it's more of an idea. Maybe it's a half a page or a
Like the
page.
pitch? Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And I do it, I'd write it.
yeah.
I don't do it over the phone.
Right.
Um, so then
Yeah,
I have a little more control of it.
yeah. Awesome.
But yeah, it's a pretty nice process.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's fantastic. Well, listen, Matt, we're going to wrap up. Before we do, we're going to do a really quick storytelling. We're going to
Great.
take a random book from my bookshelves. I'm going to choose a random sentence from a random page. I'm going to read that sentence, and this will be great from all your stand-up days.
Yeah.
I'm going to read that sentence, and then that'll be the first sentence in like a 2 minute long short story. So I'll read that sentence. You give me the next sentence or two, whatever comes to your mind. I'll do a sentence or two, and then we'll
Okay,
kill it when it
great.
goes completely off the rails. So give me
All
a
right.
color of a book, and I'll go grab one.
Blue,
All right.
favorite color.
No,
Yeah.
nobody ever chooses blue. They always choose red.
Really?
They do. Yeah. All right. You asked for it. I chose a brutal book.
All right. I
So
wonder if I've read it.
this is his
Yeah.
very last book before he died. Cormac McCarthy's The Passenger, which is a blue
Oh, wow.
spine.
I have not read that yet.
I love Cormac McCarthy. I could not get
Yeah.
through this book. I
Right.
It was really really a tough read for me.
All right. Does that mean I have to give you like a 500-word sentence with no punctuation?
Exactly. So choose a page between 1 and 375.
293.
Um, and he's not difficult to read. Well, he makes up a lot of words, or he uses words that are just not in modern vernacular. But
Right.
it's just trying to figure out what the hell is going on
Yeah.
sometimes. But The Road is probably my favorite book of all time. So, all right. So this is internal monologue. It's going to be very easy. All right. I'm going to read this, and you do whatever you want with it.
All right.
It's just that sometimes I think I would have found my life pretty funny if I hadn't had to live it. It's
But I
great.
did have to live it. First, I was born into the horrible family that barely acknowledged my existence and muddle my way through, often the punching bag of older siblings, until I found my own self through my love of sports shooting.
I knew he wouldn't care about my life story, not in the moment, not with the knife hovering right in front of my left eye. If I thought it would make a difference, I would tell him my miseries. But now I had to think of something entirely different.
And what I thought about was those three older brothers of mine. And every time they threatened me with everything from a hard inside fastball to a butter knife, and I was able to react in the moment.
There was the one time the eldest, Johnny, nearly did take my eye out, threatening me until the dog knocked him over and the knife almost plunged into my eye. I come back to that moment right now, to how I reacted then, which was a swift grace more than I would have accredited myself. I would have to punch him in the throat.
Him being a foot taller than me made that an unlikely prospect, but an uppercut was in play, and that's what I gave him. And the next thing I knew, the knife clanked on the ground, and I was running as if my life depended on it, which it did.
Oh, I think we call it there.
All right.
That's lovely.
That was fun.
And I like that you showed restraint. He didn't pick up the knife. He just ran away. So there was no like retaliatory.
I write what I know.
Right. This is what. Yeah, I know. That's why I always say, I'm like, I always place myself in the position of the protagonist, and then I give them about 50% more bravery than me.
Yeah.
Well, Matt, great talking to you. Congratulations on the recent release, The Murder Show, and I will see you next week in Gaithersburg.
Looking forward to it, Carter. I appreciate it.
Thanks, buddy. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, that is it. That is my conversation with Matt Goldman. I also wanted to make a note that Matt's newest book, The Murder Show, is out now, and you should absolutely go check it out. It looks fantastic. And I've been seeing it everywhere. And if you want to read everything about Matt, just go to mattgoldman.com. If you want to find out more about me, my books, my blogs, my newsletters, my events, just go to carterwilson.com. And if you're interested in any of my writing coaching services, head on over to unboundwriter.com. That is it. That concludes this episode of Making It Up. It was a good one. There's going to be another episode out just next week. As always, thank you for watching and or listening. Take care.